The desert stretched endless, a sea of dust and bone under the bleeding sky. A crow wheeled above, its cry sharp against the hush of twilight, and 3 horses pushed through the sand with the weariness of beasts that had carried too much for too long. The men riding them kept their silence, but each gaze told a different story: greed, guilt, and desperation stitched together by the promise of gold. Ethan Cole shifted in his saddle, the leather creaking beneath him. His eyes scanned the horizon, trained by years of war to catch the smallest flicker of movement. He had survived the battlefield, but survival had cost him everything. The memory of his brother's body, sprawled and broken, haunted every step. The treasure they sought was meant to be his redemption, though deep down he knew redemption was a lie whispered by men too afraid to face the truth of who they had become. Beside him rode Silas Kane, a man whose silence was not born of grief but of calculation. His hand rested loosely on his revolver, and the faint curl of his lips suggested he measured every soul he met in ounces of gold and drops of blood. His reputation preceded him. Towns whispered of his betrayals, of partners left to rot while Silas walked away richer. Ethan kept him close not out of trust but necessity. The map to the treasure was incomplete, and Silas held a piece. Trailing behind, half-slouched, was Jeb Turner, known in gambling halls and saloons as the Coyote. His grin, crooked and sly, masked a survival instinct sharper than any blade. He cracked jokes when fear pressed too heavy on the air, and though Ethan dismissed him as a fool, more than once that fool's cunning had kept them alive. Tonight, Jeb hummed a tune off-key, perhaps to drown out the gnawing hunger in his belly, or perhaps to remind them all that even in death's shadow, laughter still had its place. The road behind had not been kind. Only a day ago, they had spilled blood in a forgotten town. A dying soldier clutching a whiskey bottle had been their target. He held the other half of the map. The soldier had begged, whispered about a fortune buried where the sun kissed the graves of the nameless. But the moment he revealed his secret, shadows crept from doorways, rifles flashing in the dark. Gunfire shattered the stillness, glass broke, women screamed. Ethan had shot his way out, dragging the others with him, but the image of Silas pushing a dying boy in front of a bullet lingered. The man had no conscience, only survival, and yet Ethan needed him. That fact gnawed deeper than hunger. Now, as the last colors of day surrendered to night, the 3 dismounted near a cluster of boulders. The horses snorted, restless, sensing what men too stubborn to admit could not. Danger was never far. Ethan gathered wood, his movements deliberate, while Silas sat apart, sharpening his knife against a whetstone with long, patient strokes. Jeb busied himself with the saddlebags, muttering about beans that never tasted like beans once the desert had its way with them. The fire crackled, shadows dancing against the stone. Ethan's gaze lingered on the flames, lost in memory. His brother's voice came back, faint as smoke. "We'll find a place, Ethan. A place where war can't reach us." But that place never came. The bullet that ended his brother's life had carved a wound deeper than any blade, and now Ethan sought gold as though it could fill the hollow. Yet every step toward the treasure felt more like a descent into the same grave his brother already occupied. Jeb broke the silence. "You know, boys, they say a man can die of thirst faster than hunger. But me, I'll die of boredom if someone doesn't start talking." His laugh was thin, an echo swallowed by the night. Neither Ethan nor Silas replied. Jeb sighed, poked the fire, and added, "Fine. Keep your secrets. Just remember, secrets don't fill graves, they dig them." The hours stretched. Coyotes howled in the distance, their cries a reminder of the wildness surrounding them. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, letting exhaustion drag him under. But sleep was a treacherous thing. In dreams, his brother's face appeared again, pale and accusing, his mouth opening to speak words Ethan never wanted to hear. The gunfire of memory returned, the battlefield alive in his mind. He jerked awake, sweat slicking his brow despite the night's chill. It was then he saw it, Silas, standing over him, the firelight gleaming on the revolver drawn and steady. His eyes were hard, unblinking, the kind of eyes that had decided something hours before. "You sleep too heavy, Cole," Silas said, his voice low, a serpent's hiss beneath the crackle of flames. "Men like you don't wake when the world comes calling." Ethan's hand twitched toward his own weapon, but Silas's finger flexed on the trigger. The space between them shrank into something sharp, something final. Jeb stirred, sensing the shift, his grin fading as his gaze darted between them. The fire popped, sending a spark into the dark, and for a heartbeat the desert held its breath. 3 men, 1 treasure, and trust already unraveling thread by thread. The night could end with blood, or dawn could bring another chance at survival. But as Ethan stared into the barrel pointed at him, he knew one truth above all: this hunt was never about gold. It was about who could outlast the others. And in the desert, gold was heavy, but betrayal was heavier. The horses shifted, the coyotes cried again, and silence pressed in. The story of their hunt had only just begun, but already the first shot trembled in the air, waiting to be fired. Dawn broke pale and merciless, washing the desert in gold that burned the eyes but offered no warmth. The fire had died, leaving only ash, and the three men faced one another as if the night silence had already carved lines between them. Silas's revolver was no longer raised, but its weight still lingered in the space, heavy as a gallows rope. Ethan sat rigid, watching him, every nerve taut, while Jeb fiddled with his canteen, his grin forced and brittle. "You nearly ended this hunt before it began," Ethan said, voice low. Silas shrugged, slipping the weapon back into its holster. "I was measuring your worth. A man who fears death ain't fit to chase it." Ethan's jaw tightened, though he said nothing more. The map they carried burned in his mind, a promise too close to abandon and too dangerous to share. They had a direction now, a graveyard lost to shifting sands, marked by weathered stones and forgotten names. Gold waited there, or so the soldier's dying breath had sworn. They mounted their horses once more. The desert stretched ahead, cruel and endless. Wind scoured the dunes, and each hoofbeat echoed like a drum of war. Hours passed in gritted silence. Jeb muttered under his breath, snatches of jokes swallowed by the wind, until at last a distant thunder rolled, not from the sky but from riders. Dust plumed on the horizon, and the shape of armed men emerged. "Company," Ethan muttered. Silas's hand was already on his gun. "Looks like the vultures caught the scent." The chase began without words. Bullets sliced through the air, spitting sand. Horses screamed, men shouted, and the desert became a storm of chaos. Ethan leaned low, firing backward, each shot deliberate, measured, trained by years when survival was a soldier's only prayer. Jeb whooped despite the danger, weaving in and out, his wild grin flashing as he lobbed insults at their pursuers. Silas rode with calm precision, firing as if the outcome was already his to command. But the riders pressed hard. They knew the desert's veins, every canyon and ridge. The three fugitives veered toward a dry gulch, hooves pounding on cracked earth. One enemy fell, his horse stumbling under a bullet, yet two more rose to take his place. The gulch narrowed, walls closing like jaws. Ethan's heart hammered. If they were trapped, it would be their grave. At the last moment, Jeb spotted a rise where the stone had crumbled into a jagged ramp. "This way, boys!" he yelled, spurring his horse. The animals climbed, hooves scraping, and the three burst onto higher ground, leaving dust and curses behind. Shots still rang out, but the riders faltered below, unwilling to risk the climb. They pressed on until silence swallowed the desert again. Their breaths came ragged, sweat cutting lines through the dirt on their faces. For a long while none spoke. Then Silas laughed, low and dark. "They'll be back. Greed's a disease that doesn't heal easy." By dusk, the graveyard appeared, an ocean of crooked stones jutting from sand, each marker bearing no name, only erosion's cruel touch. Wind whistled through broken wood, carrying whispers that might have been memory or madness. The place stank of decay and history, a fitting cradle for fortune and ruin alike. "This is it," Ethan said, though the words felt hollow. They dismounted. The air pressed heavy. Jeb pulled the map, its creases torn and edges burned. He laid it across a stone, tracing the ink with a dirt-streaked finger. "Somewhere here." Sun sets east of the marker stone, 2 paces past the soldier's grave. They searched, boots crunching over brittle weeds and sand. Hours bled into darkness until at last Silas's boot struck wood. A buried chest, the earth clinging to its edges. His grin was wolfish as he dropped to his knees. Together they hauled it free, breath ragged with the weight. The lock was rusted but broke under Silas's knife. The lid groaned open, and moonlight spilled onto stacks of gold coins, their gleam blinding. For a heartbeat, silence ruled. Then Jeb let out a broken laugh. "By God, it's real." Greed hung thicker than the desert heat. Silas's hand drifted to his revolver, subtle as a snake in grass. Ethan caught the movement, his own weapon already drawn. Jeb hesitated, torn between loyalty and survival, his eyes darting like a cornered animal. The three formed a triangle around the chest, each man's breath shallow, each finger trembling on the trigger. The world shrank to this circle of stone and sand, this moment where trust had no place. "You think either of you walks away with it all?" Ethan's voice was steady, though his chest thundered. Silas smirked. "I walk away with more than you." That's all that matters. Jeb tried to laugh, but it cracked. Boys, come now. We could split it. Ain't no gold worth dying for. But the desert knew better. Gold was always worth dying for. The guns spoke in unison, thunder crashing in the graveyard. Sparks lit the night, and smoke curled over the stones. Jeb cried out, clutching his side, stumbling backward into the sand. Silas dropped to one knee, his smirk dissolving into shock as blood seeped through his shirt. Ethan stood, chest heaving, revolver steady. Silence returned, broken only by Jeb's ragged breaths and Silas's last curse, spat into the night before his eyes went still. The chest remained open, gold gleaming, but its shine carried no warmth. Ethan knelt beside Jeb, whose grin flickered weak even in pain. "Told you," Jeb whispered. "Graves dig themselves." Then his laughter turned to a cough, and his body stilled. Alone, Ethan faced the treasure. It was his for the taking, yet the weight of it pressed heavier than any burden he had carried before. The memory of his brother rose again, the promise of peace they had dreamed of. Gold could not buy that peace. Gold could not unbury the dead. He closed the chest, the sound sharp in the silence. With deliberate hands, he pushed sand over it, returning it to the grave from which it came. The desert swallowed secrets, and this one would remain. Mounting his horse, he turned away. The horizon stretched endless, and though he carried nothing of coin or weight, he felt lighter. The desert wind caught his coat, carrying it like a banner as he rode into the dark. Behind him, the graveyard whispered, the coins gleaming unseen, waiting for the next fool who believed fortune could outshine fate. And as the night swallowed the last trace of hoofbeats, the story of 3 men, 1 treasure, and the betrayals that bound them bled into legend, unfinished yet eternal.